Hi, welcome back. I'm Kelsey, and today I'm going to be walking you through my oil painting process from start to finish. So I have a reference pulled up. I'm going to be looking at inspiration as well from another artist, and I have my panel prepped, ready to go, and we're going to be blending colors. I'm going to be sort of transferring the image onto the surface and walking you through my strategy, how I paint front to back, painting around things, and how you can make a scene more interesting, sort of selectively picking elements from your reference photo. And yeah, I'm just gonna be sort of walking you through my process, and we're gonna be troubleshooting things that might crop up along the way together. So yeah, let's get started. Alright, so before we dive into the painting itself, I want to talk a little bit about our reference photo and some inspiration for this piece and how we're going to be going about it, what we're going to be painting first, second, etc., to really give you an idea of my thought process when I think through painting a piece in advance. So this is our reference photo. It is a photo of some coast. We've got some wildflowers over here, some waves breaking, a lot of rocks, some pretty complicated foliage down here, and a little bit of a sunset situation. Sorry, the election is tomorrow, so I'm getting like a bunch of texts on my iPad, even though put it on Do Not Disturb. Anyway, back to our reference. So this is heavily edited. The original reference photo is this. It's pretty dull in colors. It looks probably pretty gray on camera. There's like really not a lot of interesting, really compelling stuff going on here in terms of colors, at least for me. I really like to have just a lot of stuff going on. I really like a lot of bright colors, a lot of really vivid, saturated things. I can see already that this like complicated foliage area is going to be a problem. There is just a lot here. Like if I were to try to represent all of these individually, it would take me ages and it wouldn't look good. So an artist that I think can really deal with these complicated foliage areas successfully is the work of Erin Hanson. She's an Impressionist painter that considers herself the pioneer of the open Impressionism movement. I would call her just a contemporary or a modern Impressionist. And you can see in her work, she uses like the paint around method a lot. It's like kind of the hallmark of her style. So she paints, I believe, just looking at her work, I don't know her personally or anything, I think she paints front to back. So she paints the elements closest to the viewer, in this case these flowers, first, and then paints around them to achieve everything else. So the mountains, the sky, the rest of this grass that's sort of receding into the distance, like that. And sort of after the flowers are already established. I think that would be a pretty successful strategy here. We block in the flowers first, and then we try to paint the rocks, and then these rocks back here, and then the ocean, and then maybe this area. Or maybe because we want the rocks to be pretty similar, we paint these rocks and then all of this area, this sort of like peninsula island thing, and then the ocean, and then we go into the sky. Sort of trying to think about these problems ahead of time, I think can always result in a better painting. I often try to jump into something without really thinking it through, and I almost always regret that. I've painted a lot of stuff in the past 2 weeks that I just like really haven't liked, and I want to take this time in this video to both like practice thinking things through just for myself, but also show you like when I do think things through, this is what happens and this is how I go about doing that. So now that we've covered sort of our approach to this painting, what I'm going to be doing, the inspiration that we're going to be taking, let's start mixing our colors and establish our underpainting and just sort of get in the middle of it. voiceover Kelsey here. We're mixing our colors now, and essentially what we're doing here is we're looking at the reference photo and we're mixing colors that match that. A good portion of the reference photo will be using colors out of the tubes. We have a lot of cobalt blue, a lot of dioxazine purple, a lot of luminous opera, and I'll leave all of the colors that I'm using on my palette right now in the description below. But essentially my strategy here is I'm mixing the warm colors first and then placing them on that side of my palette. And so my strategy for mixing colors is that I try to keep the colors that I'm using to a minimum as much as I can. So the more additional paint colors that you add to your mix, the duller and muddier that it becomes, and that the brightest, most vivid, compelling mixes come from colors that only have a couple of things in them. So for example, I wouldn't want to add every single red and every single yellow. If I was trying to make an orange, I would just add one red and one kind of yellow, mix that, see what happens. And then, you know, if I have a color chart, I could reference that. Maybe I'll add, you know, a little bit of a different yellow to add a little bit more warmth to it if the yellow that I used was too cool, etc. So you'll see me struggling with those purples quite a bit. I eventually settled for putting dioxazine purple on my palette and using that to mix. I think that really helped actually, because I was really struggling to sort of get that nice lavender color that like has a little bit of warmth to it, but like isn't super cold. I really struggled with that, and I think using dioxazine purple really helped me achieve that sort of perfect lavender kind of color. So don't be afraid to, you know, test things out a little bit, but try to get as close to the reference photo as you can. You can always, of course, take liberties. I will be using much more phthalo green, for example, than is in my reference photo, just in the way that I sort of interpret this painting. And so our paint colors are pretty much mixed, so let's get back to real-time Kelsey, and she's gonna give you all the deets about this underpainting. Okay, so just checking in, all of our colors are now blended and we're ready to get painting. So, as I said, we're gonna be doing a pink underpainting for this. You want your underpainting paint, I prefer mine at least, to be a little bit soupy so I can really scrub it in. If you want yours to be a little bit more solid, that's totally fine. One thing that you could also do is sort of take a clean rag and sort of rub it really into the fine grain of whatever surface that you're working on. But I don't know, I sort of, I like to work wet and wet as much as possible. So I want it to be pretty thin, but still have like that color that sort of takes away the white. Just a tad, just to, sort of give us a little bit of a hint. One thing that I might do while I'm working, if I sort of run out of mixing space, if I find myself mixing a different color than the one that I've pre-mixed, I will be using my secondary palette. This post shade box is excellent, but it does have a small palette size. I really like to just have a lot of colors to work with. I don't like to mix on my canvas, I like to mix on my palette. I think that sort of mixing on the palette, taking colors straight from the palette or the tube, really sort of helps me maintain that more impressionistic style, which uses sort of a limited amount of blending. Yeah, I like a big palette. So I might be using the secondary palette that I have on my work table area. If you really like having a small palette, by all means continue doing whatever you're comfortable with. But this is sort of like how I'll be working. So now we're going to switch into a time lapse with a voiceover, sort of walking you through my process as I go into it. All right, so let's get painting. It is Monday, November 2nd. The US election is tomorrow, and oh man, I am so anxious. I am trying to put that aside and sort of shove my anxiety into a box and not check 538's election forecast every 2 seconds, but that is kind of impossible. I'm just gonna do the best that I can here. But in the video right now, we are working on our underpainting, really scrubbing that in. I'm using a pretty flexible brush at first, and then I'll later use a stiffer brush to sort of carve out our sketch. Talking a bit about sort of my underpainting strategy and what I use that for, I recently got a question on my Instagram when I was sort of looking for topics to talk about on this video about sort of what I use underpaintings for and sort of when I choose one color over another. So there are a few different kinds of underpaintings that, well, there are a few different techniques for an underpainting. My version of a quote-unquote underpainting is just the thing that I put on the canvas first. I really like to have a really bright, contrasting, or sometimes complementary color for my underpainting, and my style or my technique, you usually will like be able to see my underpainting even after the painting's already finished. So I'll leave some space from the top brush strokes so you can sort of see the underpainting between them. And that'll become more clear as we progress with this painting. You'll see what I mean a little bit better, but you can look at my work and sort of tell that's what's going on. So for this piece, I chose a bright pink underpainting. I noticed that sort of pink was a really prevalent color in my edited reference photo. I did that a little bit on purpose, but yeah, sometimes I'll use a really bright green for my underpainting if I want to show sort of light passing through leaves on like a tree or like a forest scene without having to paint every individual leaf. And then I'll leave that bright green underpainting sort of to show you, the viewer, that like there is light here and it is passing through some leaves and it's coming from sort of the back of the painting shining towards you. So in the video right now, we are sort of transferring our sketch, our reference photo, onto our panel. I basically just overlaid a grid onto my reference photo that sort of, I corrected for the aspect ratio already. So the reference photo that you see in Procreate is on a 9x12 canvas, and this is a 9x12 panel. And then I was able to establish the midpoint, and then from the midpoint sort of put other midpoints from like, essentially I'm establishing a grid, and then I am transferring the image as I see it with that grid in mind onto our panel. You'll notice that I'm making the flowers much bigger than they are in the reference photo. I'm sort of taking away some elements, as I talked about a little bit earlier. And this is because the sort of wildflower situation was a little bit busy. I really wanted those flowers in there, but I wanted more of them. I wanted to be a little bit larger. So I had taken some photos of daisies a few weeks ago before sort of it got cold here in Alaska. And I'm using those to look at sort of the shapes of these daisies, what they look like, and I'm sort of painting some of them just really wherever I feel like it on this painting, and then using sort of the chiseled edge of a stiff brush to carve away some of that underpainting, showing the white underneath, and then that's sort of serving as a contrast to where I added a little bit more paint left over from our underpainting on top to sketch in the mountains. And we're out of time right now for this bit of the time lapse, so let's jump back into real time Kelsey and everything that she's got to say. Okay, so we're doing pretty good so far. Got my hot chocolate, that's the painting there in the background. You can see we've got the whole sketch sort of translated, figured out. If you were paying attention in the time lapse, you probably noticed that I added some extra flowers and deleted some of the elements that were, I don't know, more like grassy and like confusing to translate, I guess. So I had taken photos of daisies a few months ago, so I sort of looked at those and found shapes that I liked and sort of put those in there. So I'll be using external reference. I'm sorry that I did not mention that earlier. I had no idea that I was gonna do that. But I mean, hey, that's what happens, you know, like you can add color, you can add like more flowers, and sort of, you know, do whatever you want because it's your painting. Sorry, my hair is just, it's doing a thing. Good stuff, good stuff. I got my studio light behind me. That is how I've been sort of lighting this whole situation. And I have my canvas lamp, of course, over here, which I have a review of on my channel if you're curious about how I film a lot of top-down shots. I use this because it has a mount on it up there. So yeah, that's what we've been doing so far. I think we're in a pretty good spot. Like I said in sort of our little strategy session, I will be doing the flowers next. I find that like the earliest I can put the pure white on, the better. But I do want like that little pink exterior around the flower petals. I think that like adds a nice touch. So the white of the flowers will go on next. I'll be using probably a filbert brush for that because I do want them to have a little like kind of tapered edges. And I find that just best to use with a filbert. I'll be using a small filbert. I've been using mostly flats so far. The thing that you saw me sort of scrub the underpainting on with were a few different brushes. But I think mainly my long flat Master's Choice. I think this is Master's Choice from Rosemary & Co. I will leave a link to them down in the description, but I think this is a really great brush. It's really flexible. It's not super stiff. So I was using a larger version of, I think a larger version of this, maybe this exact brush. I was using a Princeton Dakota 6300F in either a size 4 or 6 to sort of draw things in, sort of carve it out of the underpainting. You'll notice that like when I sort of use this sort of really chiseled, nice kind of flat edge, I reveal more of the white again. And I think it's a decent strategy. I like doing that. I think especially for the flowers, I don't want to add a lot more paint that I'm going to have to paint over. So I think in the case of like the mountains and stuff, I want a more like visible thing there, especially for you guys painting at home. So yeah, I prefer a stiffer brush for sketching things in. But yeah, so I am going to finish drinking my hot chocolate and then we'll jump back into the time lapse. One of the things that I struggled with these flowers was trying to really get that sort of bright white. Despite my best efforts, some of the paint was showing through. A thing that like I fully anticipated and maybe really should have like, waited a few days for this sketch to dry and then just put the white on top. That probably would have been much better actually, and then I could have maybe done another layer of the pink to try to get like, even more color for my underpainting that would be shining through. But yeah, I just went fully wet and wet, fully alla prima, as those fancy artists say. So yeah, I should have waited. I should have put the white on after the pink had dried, but I didn't, and I regret that now. But one of the things that you can always do with oil painting is just, let what you have dry and then paint on top of it. So I think after this painting has fully dried for a few days, I am speaking to you from the future because this painting is actually done now. I am looking at past me paint this right at the moment. So I think the thing that I will be doing once this full layer is dry is sort of go back and use that white paint again to really sort of bring more life to these daisies and these flower petals. I acknowledge that they look a little bit wonky, but I didn't want to give them unnecessary complexity. So it's a fine line to walk, but I don't know. I did my best, and I think I will go back to this and try to sort of like correct those mistakes. Yeah, I will leave you guys with a short bit of music until present Kelsey has some more stuff to say. Alright, well, I just did like 30 minutes of work, but I didn't hit the record button, so my bad, guys. Let me show you what I've done. This is a really great example of the paint around method, where you can see like I'm sort of sculpting this area out. I'm using, this is phthalo green over here, this color here. It looks really dark, but this is like, I don't know, it's very green. So I'm using phthalo green to sort of like show that there's more foliage in here, sort of bridging this area, making them a little wispy, sort of like grass. And then I'm also using them to sort of fill in this space between where I've painted in like some leaves. Just sort of show you that like, this is like kind of a bush and there are wildflowers here and like there's some dense grass. And like, as you can see in the reference photo, I'm not really gonna be painting this. And then I'm also leaving this thing out because it would be too insane. So I'm taking a page out of Erin Hanson's book, and I'm sort of painting around these stem areas. I really like how she did that there. So I'm applying that method over here. Alright, so it is the next day. We've got our flower area pretty much done, and we're in the middle of working on sort of this rocky area right now. I think I really amplified the flowers in my sketch, maybe a little bit too much, and so I took quite a bit of space away from these rocks. And in your version of this painting, if you'd like to recreate it, you can give the flowers less space if you'd like, obviously, because it's your painting. So that sort of forced me to make some hard decisions about what I wanted to do for these rocks. So if you look at the reference photo, there's a lot of like kind of striations in the rocks. A lot of stuff is happening there, and I had to really condense that down and like simplify all of that information. So I went with more of an abstract approach. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to really like sort of realistically render that. So I instead sort of tried to kind of condense things, add a little bit of color. I used a little bit of that transparent red oxide, made sort of like a burnt red color that will later be used. And I've actually already applied it in the islands across that little bay area. I then added a kind of like tan beigey kind of color. Didn't want to use straight white, even though the rocky area in the reference photo is pretty bright, because I didn't want that color to have to compete with the white of the flowers. And I wanted sort of the flowers to be the main focus, and if the rocks were also really light, that would have sort of made your eye stray a little bit from the flowers. So I went with a beige for that color, a kind of like pinky sort of beige. And then I used a pretty liberal amount of purple, really sort of stretching that to make it a little bit fun. I don't know, like this is sort of, my painting, and I sort of wanted to have a good time. And so I, am making some decisions that maybe they don't reflect in my reference photo, but like I think they look good in the moment. And so that's sort of what I go with. And I think I feel more comfortable making those spontaneous decisions when I have a plan, when I've already strategized. So yeah, now we're working on sort of the island across this bay, those cliffs. I've put down some purple already. I'm using a lot of just like straight orange, straight up yellow, the same bright green that I've used in that like sort of middle right corner under that flower. I'm using that again on the island across the water, trying to show you that like there's grass there are some cliffs. I think I messed up a little bit with the purple. I should have been more deliberate about my brush strokes there. I really wanted the pink to show through a little bit more, but I was a little bit hasty when I shouldn't have been, so that's my bad. But you live and you learn, and sort of we're all sort of learning as we go and doing our best. So yeah, I'm just sort of adding a little bit more details to this cliff area back here, and then we're gonna get started on the ocean and the sky pretty shortly actually. So I'm just sort of finishing that up and then making the transition to the ocean. The first thing that I did with painting this ocean was to sort of block in these sort of white sea foam areas where the waves are sort of crashing down into the water or against some of the rocks. And I wanted to establish, as per the reference photo, that there's some foam happening across the bay. Yeah, went for that, and now I am adding the sort of lightest area of the ocean, helping sort of transition that into the horizon line, or the vanishing point, I suppose, and then adding a little bit more of a deeper blue, eventually transitioning into the cobalt blue, which is our darkest blue for this piece, and trying to keep those brush strokes as separate as possible. So now we're jumping in with some more medium blue, and then taking our time to add in that cobalt blue. I eventually switched to a much smaller brush to really get in those areas where you see those flower petals and the rocks in the forefront, and really try to like make a clean line there to really show the viewer that like this area is coming toward you and the ocean is behind it. So I wanted that to be very clear. All right, oh man, we are in the home stretch of this painting now. We are finally working on the sky. Oh my god, this video is gonna be so long. It was at like 45 minutes, and I think I've managed to condense it down to maybe like 35 or 37, but oh man, this is like my longest video to date for sure. But I really wanted to be as comprehensive as possible with this time lapse and sort of show you guys my process from start to finish, giving you guys as much valuable information as I possibly can, answering questions along the way. And the question that I'm going to be answering right now is from my Instagram. I had someone ask me how to get started with oil painting if they are a total beginner, and I have some good news for you. This video is aimed a little bit more towards someone who is familiar with painting, but wants to level up their skills, wants some information about other people's workflow and what they do. So I am assuming that you know a little bit about mixing colors, how to handle your brush, how to handle your palette knife, and the premise of like fat over lean and like painting around things. But I know that like maybe a lot of you don't know those things, and I am sort of assuming something that maybe isn't true. So I think the next video on my channel is going to be sort of an oil painting 101, covering all of the basics, walking you through how to mix colors, how to prepare your panels, where I get my brushes, my panels, my paints, what I would suggest for a beginner, and sort of the best resources that I think are available to level up your skills. So yeah, that's gonna be the next video on my channel. So if you are not subscribed and you've watched 30 minutes of this now, I really recommend that you subscribe so you can stay tuned and get notified whenever I release a new video. So hit that bell icon and hit that like button if you enjoy this video. But yeah, we're working on the sky at the moment on screen right now. I think clouds are definitely my weakest point. I really struggle with clouds. That's a thing that I really need to improve on. I'm just sort of like doing things with my brush and hoping that it looks okay. And eventually you'll notice that I get sick of sitting down, so I stand up, and so the perspective kind of changes a little bit there. So I noticed that a fair bit of my colors were turning a little bit muddy, so I took the time to clean my brushes, wipe them off really well as best as I could, and just use straight white, trying to bring back a little bit more life to these clouds. But oh man, this painting is done. I think it looks great. I had a blast painting this. I've really been struggling with some artist block and not really liking the things that I've been making, so I think this painting was a really great way to let go creatively, have a good time, and also really practice those essential skills of developing my style a little bit more, mixing colors, translating an image onto a canvas, etc. So I hope you had an excellent time watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. All right, bye guys.